It is September, 490 BC. The world holds its breath. On a narrow coastal plain northeast of Athens, a strip of land barely 6 miles long, two armies face each other across the morning fog. One is the most powerful military machine the ancient world has ever known, an empire that stretches from the shores of the Aegean Sea all the way to the banks of the Indus River. An empire of 100 languages, 1,000 gods, and 1,000,000 soldiers. The other is a city, just a city, with perhaps 10,000 men standing between civilization and conquest. What happens next will change the world forever. This is the Battle of Marathon. Athens in 490 BC is something extraordinary. Just 20 years earlier, in 508 BC, a reformer named Cleisthenes had given Athens something no major civilization had ever tried before: democratia, rule by the people. Every male citizen, regardless of birth or wealth, had a voice in how his city was governed. Every man could speak in the assembly. Every man could vote. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was gloriously, stubbornly, beautifully free. The Athenians were fiercely proud of this experiment. They had built something fragile and precious, and they knew it. To the east, something vast and dark was watching. Darius I, Darius the Great, is one of the most capable rulers in human history. He has taken an already enormous empire and made it larger still. He is a brilliant administrator, a pragmatic conqueror, and a man absolutely convinced of his divine right to rule the world. And in his mind, the world includes Greece. To Darius, the Greek city-states are not a serious military threat. They are a problem to be solved. A collection of squabbling, warring little towns that refuse to acknowledge Persian supremacy. The road to Marathon begins not in Greece, but on the other side of the Aegean Sea. In Ionia, the western coast of modern Turkey was home to dozens of Greek cities that had fallen under Persian control. They paid tribute, they supplied soldiers, they lived under Persian-appointed tyrants. They were not happy about it. In 499 BC, the Ionian Greeks revolted. The city of Miletus, led by a man named Aristagoras, rose up against Persian rule and sent desperate messages to mainland Greece, asking for help. Sparta, the most powerful military state in Greece, listened, considered the distance, and said, "No, too far away, not our problem." The Athenians voted to help. They sent 20 ships. The city of Eretria sent 5 more. It was enough to attract Persian attention. In 498 BC, the combined Greek force marched inland and burned Sardis, the Persian regional capital in western Anatolia. The flames were visible for miles. When news of the burning reached Darius, he is said to have asked, "Who are the Athenians?" When told, he took a bow, shot an arrow into the sky, and said, "Grant me, O God, that I may punish the Athenians." Then he ordered a servant to whisper in his ear 3 times every evening before dinner, "Master, remember the Athenians." He would not forget. The Ionian revolt ultimately failed. In 494 BC, the Persian fleet crushed the Ionian Greeks at the Battle of Lade. Miletus was destroyed. Its men were killed, its women and children were enslaved. The revolt was over, but Darius had a long memory. In 492 BC, Darius sent a general named Mardonius to begin the conquest of Greece, aiming to sweep down through Thrace and Macedonia. A violent storm off the peninsula of Mount Athos destroyed 300 Persian ships and 20,000 men. The expedition was called off. In 491 BC, Darius sent heralds to every Greek city-state, demanding earth and water, symbolic tokens of submission. The Athenians threw the Persian heralds into a pit. The Spartans threw theirs into a well, reportedly saying, "You want earth and water? Find it at the bottom." In the summer of 490 BC, Darius launched his second expedition. He chose a direct sea crossing across the Aegean, faster, more decisive. He appointed two commanders, Datis, a Median general of considerable experience, and Artaphernes, his own nephew. Together, they commanded an army between 25,000 and 40,000 men. With them sailed Hippias, the former tyrant of Athens, the very man they had expelled 20 years before. Old now, in his 80s, but his desire for revenge was undimmed. The Persian fleet did not sail directly to Athens. It made an example of those who had defied them. The island of Naxos was burned. Then the fleet turned toward Eretria. After a week of fighting, Eretria fell. Its temples were burned. Its population was enslaved, led away in chains to be resettled somewhere in the vast Persian Empire, as a lesson to all who defied the King of Kings. In Athens, the news landed like a thunderbolt. Eretria was gone. The Persian fleet was visible from the Athenian coast. And then, the Persians had landed at Marathon. The plain of Marathon is about 26 miles northeast of Athens. Hippias had chosen the landing site personally, wide and flat, perfect for cavalry maneuvers. The Persian force set up camp on the northern end of the plain. Their cavalry patrolled the approaches. Their archers prepared their composite bows. They waited. Athens had 10 generals, strategoi, who held equal authority. As the Persian threat materialized, they faced the most consequential vote in Athenian history. The generals were split, 5 for marching out, 5 for staying. The deciding vote fell to the polemarch, Callimachus of Aphidna. One of the generals, Miltiades, went to him personally. Miltiades was unlike most Athenian generals. He had lived in the Persian world. He had seen the Persian army from the inside. He knew how it fought. He understood its strengths. And critically, he knew its weaknesses. Callimachus, it is now in your hands to reduce Athens to slavery or to make her free, and to leave behind you for all future generations a memory more glorious than even Harmodius and Aristogeiton. Never since the Athenians became a people were they in so great a danger as now. The outcome is in your hands. Decide now. Callimachus voted to fight. The decision was made. Before the army marched, Athens sent a runner, Phidippides, a professional long-distance messenger called a hemerodromos. His mission? Run to Sparta. Ask for help. The distance from Athens to Sparta is approximately 150 miles. He covered it in 2 days. On the slopes of Mount Parthenion, Phidippides later claimed he encountered the god Pan, who asked why the Athenians did not worship him. Phidippides arrived in Sparta and stood before the Spartan magistrates. His message was simple. Come, we need you. Athens is in danger. The Spartans said they would come, but it was the sacred festival of Carneia. Spartan law absolutely forbade military action. They would march as soon as the festival ended, on the full moon. That was 6 days away. Phidippides ran back to Athens with the news. The Athenians would fight alone, almost alone. There was one other Greek city that answered Athens's call. Plataea, a small Boeotian city, had sought Athenian protection years before. Athens had helped them. The Plataeans had not forgotten. When the call went out, every single Plataean soldier capable of bearing arms marched to Marathon. Ancient sources say it was approximately 1,000 men. It was a tiny force, but what it represented was enormous. Solidarity, loyalty, and the power of alliance. For Athens, the arrival of a single Plataean soldier meant the world. The Greeks took up a defensive position on the hills overlooking the plain, blocking the 2 roads that led from Marathon to Athens, while denying the Persian cavalry room to maneuver. For 5 days, perhaps as many as 8 days, nothing happened. The Persians waited for the Greeks to come down and fight. The Greeks waited in their defensive position. In the Greek camp, the tension was immense. Some generals wanted to stay put. Some wanted to attack immediately. Miltiades argued for offense, but only at the right moment. The Persian cavalry was what Miltiades feared most. Persian horse archers could destroy a Greek phalanx if given room to maneuver. The key was to deny them that room. And then, on what was probably the 6th or 7th day, something changed. The Persian cavalry vanished from the plain. Some suggest the cavalry had been re-embarked on ships, but when Miltiades saw the opportunity, cavalry gone, the plain momentarily open, he made his decision. Attack, now. The morning of the battle, the Greek army rose before dawn and prepared. The ritual sacrifices were performed. The omens were favorable. Callimachus, the polemarch, would command the right wing, the position of honor in Greek warfare. The Plataeans took the left wing. The Athenian tribal regiments filled the center. Miltiades made a critical decision. He thinned the center of his line to perhaps 4 ranks deep instead of the normal 8, while strengthening both wings. A calculated gamble. The Greeks began to advance, and Herodotus tells us that the Greeks advanced at a run, charging across nearly a mile of open ground toward the Persian lines at a full sprint. This was almost certainly the first time any Greek army had charged a Persian force at full speed. The Persians, watching this bronze wave rushing toward them, were reportedly astonished. The Persians raised their composite bows. The arrows flew, but the Greeks were already at the Persian lines before the volleys could decimate them. The lines met with a sound like a thunderclap, a wall of bronze striking a wall of wicker shields and leather armor. Greek spears found flesh. Persian arrows flew point blank. The plain shook. In the center of the Greek line, exactly as Miltiades had feared, the thin formation buckled. The Persian center, their best soldiers, pushed forward. The Greek center bent and began to fall back. From the Persian perspective, the battle looked like it was going exactly as expected. Their best troops were breaking the Greek center. Another few minutes, and the Greek line would collapse entirely. But they had forgotten the wings. On both sides of the plain, the Greek wings had routed the Persian flanks, and they did not pursue the fleeing enemy. They turned inward. The Greek flanks wheeled toward the center and attacked the victorious Persian corps from both sides simultaneously, catching them in a classic double envelopment. The Persian soldiers who had been advancing in triumph suddenly found enemies on 3 sides. What had been a Persian victory became a Persian catastrophe. The Persian formation disintegrated. Men who moments before had been pressing forward in confident attack now turned and ran toward the beach, toward the ships. The marshes on the southern edge of the battlefield became a trap. Persian soldiers in heavy equipment stumbled into the mud and were slaughtered. At the water's edge, there was a desperate struggle for the ships themselves. The Greeks tried to capture or destroy them. The Persians fought savagely to protect their means of escape. This is where Callimachus, the polemarch who had cast the deciding vote to fight, fell. He had been one of the most aggressive commanders on the field. He died at the waterline. An Athenian named Cynaegirus, the brother of the playwright Aeschylus, seized one of the Persian ships with his bare hand. A Persian soldier chopped off his hand with an axe. Cynaegirus then seized the ship with his other hand. That was cut off too. He reportedly tried to hold the ship with his teeth. Whether literal or legend, it captures the spirit of that day. 7 ships were captured. The rest pulled off the beach and sailed away. And their destination was not home. It was Athens. As the Persian fleet pulled away, several Greek soldiers claimed to have seen a shield flash, a deliberate signal, from the hills above the battlefield. Someone had signaled the Persians. Someone in Athens was telling the Persian fleet that the road to Athens was open. Who flashed the shield? No one was ever charged. No one was ever proven guilty. Miltiades ordered the army to march immediately, leaving a small rear guard to watch the prisoners. The main Athenian force marched 26 miles back to Athens in a single day. In armor, after a battle, in September heat, they marched all day without stopping. They arrived at the Bay of Phalerum, just as the Persian fleet appeared on the horizon. The Persians saw the army waiting on the beach. The same army that had just destroyed their force at Marathon, standing in battle formation, ready. The Persian fleet turned around. After hovering offshore for several hours, apparently waiting for their Athenian sympathizers, who never appeared, Datis ordered the fleet to sail back to Asia. The invasion of Greece was over. Athens had survived. When the Greeks counted their dead, they found 192 Athenian soldiers fallen on the field. 192 men, each one given a name, each one mourned by his family, each one celebrated as a hero. The Persian dead, according to Herodotus, numbered 6,400. The 192 Athenian fallen were given an extraordinary honor. Rather than being carried home to their families, they were buried on the battlefield itself, in a great mound called the Soros. This was remarkable. In Greek religion, being buried away from your ancestral tombs was a serious matter. But Marathon was a sacred place now. The fallen belonged to it. Archaeologists have confirmed this burial. The mound is real. The bones are real. 25 centuries later, the men of Marathon still lie where they fell. And now we come to the story that has outlasted the battle itself. The story that every schoolchild on Earth has heard. The legend of the Marathon Run. The story goes, a Greek soldier ran from Marathon to Athens, 26 miles, to announce the victory. He gasped, "We have won! Nenekekamen," and then collapsed and died. Herodotus, our main source for Marathon, does not mention this famous run at all. The story first appears in Plutarch, writing 600 years after the battle, with contradictory names and details. In 1896, when the first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens, a race was organized to commemorate the legendary run. A Greek runner named Spyridon Louis won it and became a national hero. Today, millions of people run 26.2 miles without necessarily knowing that every single step carries an echo of that September morning in 490 BC. Marathon was not just a military victory. It was a military revelation. Before Marathon, the Persian army was considered essentially invincible. Marathon proved otherwise. The Greek hoplite was one of history's most effective soldiers, not because he was individually superior, but because of the phalanx, the collective formation that multiplied individual courage. In a phalanx, each soldier protected not just himself, but his neighbor, his shield covering the right side of the man to his left. Every man's survival depended on every other man holding the line. Miltiades' double envelopment, thin center, strong wings, wheeling inward to encircle, is one of the earliest recorded examples of a pincer movement, a tactic used for 2,500 years. From Hannibal at Cannae to the German Blitzkrieg, commanders studied and repeated this maneuver. Marathon helped write the textbook of warfare. For the Persians, Marathon was their first significant defeat at Greek hands. It introduced the idea, for the first time, that the Persian army could be beaten. For the Athenians, Marathon was more than a battle. It was a founding myth, a proof of identity, a demonstration that free men fighting for their own homes are worth more than enslaved peoples fighting for a distant king. The men who fought at Marathon were given a special name, Marathonomachoi, the marathon fighters. For the rest of their lives, They were treated with special honor in the theater and in public life. If the Persian fleet had sailed unopposed into Piraeus in 490 BC, what would have been lost? Athens itself, burned, its people enslaved, its leaders executed. In the decades after Marathon, Athens would experience an explosion of human creativity. The age of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the foundations of Western philosophy. The age of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, the inventors of theater as we know it. The age of Herodotus and Thucydides, the inventors of history itself. The Parthenon, the concept of democracy, trial by jury. The idea that the individual human mind could comprehend and question the cosmos. All of this was Athens. And all of Athens was possible because of Marathon. What Athens created became the intellectual foundation of Western civilization. The men who ran across that plain didn't know they were saving philosophy and democracy and theater and history. They knew only that their city was threatened. That was enough. One of the 192 Athenians who died at Marathon was named Euphorion. Among the 10,000 who survived was his son, a man named Aeschylus. Aeschylus would become the father of tragedy. The Oresteia, the Persians, Prometheus Bound, plays still performed today, exploring the deepest questions of justice and fate. But when Aeschylus wrote his own epitaph, he did not mention his plays. He wrote, "The sacred precinct at Marathon could tell of his glorious valor, and the long-haired Mede knows it well." He was a soldier who wrote plays, not a playwright who once fought. Marathon was the thing he was most proud of. 3 days after the battle, the Spartan army arrived at Marathon. 2,000 men, Sparta's finest, had marched from the Peloponnese as fast as they could. They were too late. The Spartans toured the battlefield. They inspected the Persian dead. They said the Athenians had done remarkably well. Then they went home. The seed of Spartan-Athenian rivalry was planted in the days when Sparta said, "Wait for the full moon," and Athens said, "We cannot wait." Darius received the news of Marathon with controlled fury. One defeat did not constitute a war. He began planning immediately for a third, much larger expedition against Greece. But in 486 BC, Egypt revolted. Darius had to deal with the rebellion. And then, in 486 BC, Darius died. He never got his revenge. His son, Xerxes, inherited the throne, the empire, and the grudge. Proud, grandiose, driven by a personal need to humiliate the Greeks who had humiliated his father. In 480 BC, 10 years after Marathon, Xerxes would lead the largest invasion force the ancient world had ever assembled against Greece. That campaign would give us Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea. But those are other stories. Marathon bought Greece 10 years. 10 years in which Athens built a fleet. The fleet that would save Greece at Salamis. 10 years in which the memory of Marathon gave Greeks the belief that they could fight and win. The Athenians painted the battle in the famous Stoa Poikile in Athens, a massive mural that Athenians walked past every day. They returned to Marathon in their speeches, their plays, their philosophy. When they needed to remind themselves of what they were capable of, they said, "We were at Marathon." The historian Herodotus treated it as the pivotal event of Greek history. Western civilization has returned to Marathon again and again. Medieval scholars knew the story. Renaissance painters depicted it. The Romantics turned it into myth. The 102 Athenian dead have lain in their mound on the plain of Marathon for 2,516 years. They were farmers, merchants, craftsmen, philosophers, and soldiers. They had families, debts, ambitions, and fears. They had no idea that the thing they were about to do would be remembered forever. They just knew it had to be done, and they did it. In 490 BC, on a narrow coastal plain in northeastern Attica, 10,000 men stood between an empire and everything that makes the modern world be possible. They ran forward when wisdom said to dig in. They attacked when caution said to wait. They fought when every rational calculation said they should surrender. And they won. The Battle of Marathon, when the Greeks defeated the mighty Persian Empire, is more than history. It is a story about what human beings are capable of when they have something worth defending, and the courage to defend it. The precinct at Marathon could tell of our glorious valor. It still does. It still does.